The boy stood in the falling snow like he'd been planted there since dawn. Boot swallowing his feet, baby sister pressed against his chest, eyes that didn't plead. Marcus Webb paused on the wooden walkway outside Brennan's trading post, a burlap sack of cornmeal tucked under one arm. The wind tore through Commerce Street like a blade through canvas, and the snow was descending heavy now, the sort that meant trouble, the sort that swallowed things whole. He couldn't have been older than 10, maybe 11 if you stretched it, skinny as a sapling. The baby against his chest was bundled in what appeared to be an old saddle blanket, and vapor puffed from her tiny mouth with every breath. His boots, some dead stranger's boots too large by miles, packed with newsprint that had already turned to mush, left tracks in the snow that resembled open gashes. He watched Marcus watching him. "You able to buy us, sir?" His voice was level. No pleading in it. No panic either. Just an offer placed forward like he was peddling firewood or spare nails. Marcus didn't respond. His jaw clenched once, twice, then he pivoted and headed toward his cart. He didn't glance back. The boy didn't shout after him. The snow continued its work, erasing Marcus's tracks fast as he created them. 20 strides, 30. The cornmeal sack pressed heavy against his shoulder. The wind shrieked down from the Thornridge Mountains. And somewhere behind him, a baby whimpered once, then fell silent. Marcus stopped. He stood there in the road, snow gathering in his beard, one hand gripping the cart rail. He didn't turn back. His breath emerged white and uneven. 12 years since Rosalind. 12 years since that nursery door shut for good. The wind wailed. He turned back around. He convinced himself he turned back because of the conditions. The blizzard was approaching. That was the only reason. The boy hadn't budged, hadn't adjusted his stance, hadn't drawn the baby tighter, hadn't done any of the things a child should do when a man walks off and abandons them in a storm. He simply watched Marcus return with those flat, calculating eyes, the eyes of someone who'd quit hoping long before. Marcus stopped 3 feet away. Near enough to notice the blue shade creeping across his lips. Near enough to see the baby had gone quiet, just drawing shallow little breaths against his chest. "Where's your family?" "Don't have any." "Your mama?" "Dead." "Daddy too." He said it the way someone might say rain or Monday. Just truth. "Wagon fever got mama. Daddy rode out for medicine." "A beat." "He's not returning." Marcus studied the sky. The clouds were the shade of gunmetal, hanging low and hostile. Another hour, 2 at most, and the trail to his property would be buried. He thought about the hollow house awaiting him, the quiet in it. The door down the corridor that he hadn't touched in 12 years. "You have a name." "Cade." "That your sister?" He nodded once. "She have a name." "Wren." Something flashed across his face. Almost defiance. Mama was fond of birds. Marcus grunted. His breath emerged in a white cloud that the wind seized. Behind him, his 2 mares shuffled and blew steam, their hides already frosted. "Storm's rolling in," he said. "Nasty one." "I know. You'll freeze standing here." "Know that too." He waited for the boy to ask, to grovel, to do something that made reasonable sense. He didn't. He just stood there in his stranger's boots, cradling his sister like she was the only solid thing left, and waited for Marcus to decide. "Hell and damnation. You're riding with me." He faced the cart, not checking to see if the boy followed. "Just until the weather passes, that's final." He heard the boots crunch through snow behind him. 1 step, 2, then silence. "What's your price?" Marcus turned. "What?" "Shelter, warmth, meals." He counted them like contract terms. "What's your price for it?" "I can labor. I'm capable. I don't require much food. The baby doesn't either. We won't cause problems." Marcus stared at him. 11 years old perhaps, bargaining like a hired worker, arranging terms like a merchant. "I don't want anything," he said. The boy didn't trust it. Marcus could tell by the way his shoulders stayed rigid, the way his gaze followed him like he might strike without warning. But he trailed Marcus to the cart regardless. Marcus lifted him onto the bench. The boy weighed almost nothing, lighter than tack. And he positioned himself at the bench's far edge, as distant from Marcus as the seat permitted. The baby stirred once, made a noise like a mourning dove, then settled again. "She doing okay?" "She's hungry, but she's managing." Marcus clicked his tongue and the mares lurched forward. The cart wheels protested against the fresh powder. They traveled without speaking. The trail out of Millstone wound through vacant pastureland, past iced-over streams and skeletal willows twisted by years of wind. The snow descended heavier now, shrinking visibility to 50 yards, then 30. Marcus kept his gaze ahead, his grip firm on the reins. Beside him, the boy didn't tremble, didn't grumble, didn't ask about distance. He simply cradled his sister and watched the white landscape drift past like it had nothing to do with him. Twice Marcus found himself glancing at the boy's boots. Men's boots, quality leather ones, now fractured and brine-marked. The left one mended with what appeared to be harness stitching. 2 sizes excessive at minimum. He'd crammed them with newsprint, but the paper had turned soggy and Marcus could see his toes shifting inside, fighting to keep circulation going. He didn't ask about their origin. The boy didn't volunteer. The homestead materialized through the snow like an apparition. Charcoal stone, pitched roof, smoke still climbing from the chimney where Marcus had tamped the morning coals. He guided the cart near the porch and climbed down. "This is the place." The boy studied the house, studied the stable, studied the oak tree on the eastern hill, its naked branches stretching upward like claws into the ash-colored sky. His expression revealed nothing. "Large," he said. "Large enough." Marcus reached up to assist him down, but the boy was already in motion. Swinging his legs over the edge, dropping into the snow with the baby still fastened against his chest. He moved like someone who'd learned not to accept assistance, like someone who'd discovered that extended hands usually expected something in return. Inside, the house was heated and dim. Marcus struck a lamp, and the darkness retreated to the edges. The boy lingered in the entrance, snow dissolving off his jacket onto the timber floor, his eyes performing that assessment again. Cataloging escape routes, Marcus understood. Scanning for other doorways, the glass panes, the ways to flee. "There's a bedroom upstairs," he said. "Down the corridor. Fresh linens. Heating stove in the corner if you need extra warmth. What about that one?" He was staring at the door. The door partway along the passage on the left. Shut. It was perpetually shut. "Storage," Marcus said. "Nothing worthwhile in there." The boy knew it was false. Marcus could detect it in how his gaze lingered on the door a breath too long. But he didn't press. "The bedroom upstairs," Marcus repeated. "You and your sister can use it while you're here." "And how long's that?" "Till the blizzard breaks." "A day, maybe 2. Then we'll sort something." The boy nodded deliberately, adjusted the baby on his hip, moved toward the staircase. Midway up, he halted. "I'm not accepting handouts," he said, without turning. "Whatever work you need, we'll handle it. I can prepare food some. Scrub, tend livestock. I'm not accepting handouts." Marcus stood at the staircase base, one palm on the banister. The lamplight illuminated half the boy's face, gaunt, defensive, a bruise fading to yellow on his cheekbone that Marcus hadn't spotted earlier. "Just keep warm," he said. "That's all I'm requesting." The boy didn't trust it. Marcus could read it in the tension across his back, but he ascended regardless. Marcus heard the bedroom door shut, heard the bolt slide into position from within. Marcus remained in the vacant corridor for a lengthy moment. The wind moaned around the house's corners. Somewhere overhead, the baby made a faint sound, not wailing, just breathing, announcing it was still alive. He glanced at the sealed door partway down the passage. 12 years. He turned away and went to tend the coals. The boy surveyed the exits before he surveyed the furniture. Learn behavior. The bedroom was more spacious than anywhere he'd slept in 2 years. An actual bed with an actual mattress, not hay stuffing or exposed planks. A window facing east, frost creeping across the glass in designs that resembled almost like script. A small iron stove in the corner, cold for now, but arranged with tinder and ready to spark. Fresh linens, a coverlet folded at the bed's foot, blue and white, hand-stitched, the sort of thing somebody's mother crafted. Cade stood in the entrance for a considerable time, Ren heavy against his chest, and waited for the trap. There was always a trap. The man downstairs, Webb, the merchant had mentioned him, Marcus Webb, controls half the territory, hadn't stated what he wanted yet, but he would. They always did. The courteous ones were just more patient about it, that's all. They preferred to wait until you felt secure, felt indebted, felt like you owed them something. Then they named their price. He crossed to the window and peered out. Snow was still descending, thick and constant, deleting the landscape. He could make out the stable from here, and past it, the dark silhouette of a tree on a modest knoll, an oak, bare, its branches like black fractures in the pale sky. Ren stirred against him, made her hungry noise. "I know," he whispered. "I know." Shortly. He didn't ignite the stove, didn't draw back the coverlet, didn't settle on the bed. Instead, he lowered himself to the floor in the corner most distant from the door, his spine against the wall, and opened his coat to let Ren feed from the small flask of milk he'd been keeping heated against his body. It was the last of it. He'd taken it from a homestead 2 days prior. Left 3 pennies on the steps, all he possessed. So it wasn't actually thieving. That's what he told himself. The milk was watery and pale, scarcely enough to satisfy her. But she drank it like it was the most precious thing on earth, her tiny fists grasping at air, her eyes shut in something that resembled almost like contentment. "Good girl," he murmured. "That's my good girl." When she finished, he burped her against his shoulder and absorbed the sounds of the dwelling. Footfalls below, the groan of a chair, the clang of iron, a poker against coals, banking a fire. Ordinary sounds, harmless sounds. He didn't believe them. He slept upright, his back against the wall, Ren tucked inside his coat against his chest. Every time the house complained or the wind surged, his eyes flew open, alert, prepared. Sometime during the night, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside his door. They halted, remained there for an extended moment. He could detect the shadow of boots in the space beneath the door, illuminated from behind by a lamp. Then the footsteps withdrew. He didn't sleep again. Morning arrived grey and bitter through the frost-sealed window. Cade woke to the aroma of coffee and something sizzling, bacon perhaps or cured pork. His stomach twisted so violently it ached. He couldn't recall the last time he'd consumed anything heated. Ren was still sleeping, her breathing soft and regular against his throat. He eased her down onto the folded coverlet. He wouldn't claim the bed, but the coverlet was warm and she required warmth. He crept to the door, listened. Footfalls below, but distant. In the cooking area, likely. The chime of a dish, a chair dragging. He unbolted the door as soundlessly as possible and slipped into the corridor. The dwelling was transformed in daylight, more expansive, tidier than he'd anticipated. No grime on the railings, no webs in the angles. Whoever occupied this place maintained it, even if he lived solitary. There were images on the walls descending the staircase. A landscape of ridges, a sketch of horses, a photograph in a decorated frame of. He stopped. A woman. Young, attractive, with dark hair arranged in a high-collared gown. She wasn't exactly smiling, but there was something gentle in her expression, something expectant, the kind of face that anticipated favorable things to occur. Cade studied that face for an extended time. Then he glanced at the sealed door partway along the passage. Storage, Marcus had claimed. The facade had been transparent. He catalogued it and continued moving. The cooking area was heated, the large iron stove radiating warmth into every space. Marcus Webb sat at a long timber table with his back to the entrance, a cup of coffee steaming beside his dish. He didn't pivot when Cade entered, but Cade noticed his shoulders adjust, conscious of him even if he didn't acknowledge it. "There's food," he said. "On the stove. Serve yourself." A pan of bacon, a pot of porridge, a basket of rolls covered with cloth. More food than Cade had witnessed in one location in months. He didn't advance. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. Still didn't rotate. "It's not a handout," he said like he'd interpreted his thoughts. "You're stranded here till the blizzard passes. Might as well eat." "Ah." Cade approached the stove like it might snap at him. Claimed a dish from the stack beside it, served himself a modest portion, one roll, one strip of bacon, a spoonful of porridge. The bare minimum, what he could repay in labor if necessary. He sat at the table's far end, as distant from Marcus as the bench permitted, and ate in careful bites, slowly, making it endure, savoring every crystal of salt, every trace of grease. His hands were trembling slightly, and he flattened them against the table so Marcus wouldn't notice. Marcus finished his coffee and withdrew from the table. He crossed to the window and gazed out at the snow still descending, his back to Cade like a barrier. "Blizzard's going to persist another day minimum," he said. "Maybe two. I figured. You need anything for the baby? You inform me. There's milk in the cooling shed. Fresh from yesterday. Blankets in the cedar trunk upstairs. All right." He pivoted then, just enough to regard Cade over his shoulder. His face was difficult to interpret in the grey light, weathered, guarded. The kind of face that had quit revealing things long before. "You going to eat more than that?" Cade looked down at his dish. Half a roll remaining, 2 bites of porridge. "I'm not that hungry." They both recognized it was false, but Marcus didn't challenge. He just nodded once and faced back to the window. "I've got work in the stable," he said. "You don't have to remain in that bedroom. House is yours to occupy. While you're here." He paused. His jaw tensed. "Just don't enter the door along the corridor. The sealed one." "Storage," Cade said. "That's right." Marcus pulled on his coat and hat and walked out into the snow. Cade observed him through the window, a dark form moving toward the stable, shoulders curved against the wind, vanishing into the white. He looked at the food still heating on the stove, looked at the sealed door along the passage, looked at his empty dish. Then he stood and began clearing the plates. By the time Marcus returned from the stable 2 hours later, the cooking area was tidier than it had been in months. Cade had scrubbed the dishes and the pan, wiped the table, swept the floor, and piled fresh kindling beside the stove. He'd located a broom in the larder and a cloth under the basin, and he'd labored without pausing, without resting. Wren propped in a basket he'd cushioned with a kitchen towel, positioned where he could monitor her. Marcus stood in the entrance, snow dissolving off his coat, and surveyed what Cade had accomplished. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Cade wrung out the cloth over the basin, not facing him. "Needed doing though." Marcus opened his mouth like he was going to object, then shut it again. Nodded slowly. Hung up his coat. "Baby doing all right?" "She's fine. Found the milk like you mentioned. She took a good feeding." "Good." Silence. The fire popped in the stove. Outside, the wind had diminished some, still snowing, but gentler now, the flakes descending straight instead of horizontal. Marcus crossed to the counter where Cade had stacked the clean dishes. Lifted one, rotated it in his hands like he was examining the work. Then he placed it down and regarded Cade. Actually regarded him for the first time since he'd come downstairs. "How old are you?" 12. The lie emerged effortlessly. He was 11, but 12 sounded more capable, old enough to contribute. 12, Marcus repeated. Something shifted in his expression. A shadow there and gone. "That's too young to be solitary." "I'm not solitary. I have Wren." Marcus didn't respond. just stood there with his hands at his sides, studying Cade like he was a dilemma he didn't know how to resolve. In the basket, Wren made a sound. Not a wail, something gentler, almost a giggle. They both turned to observe her. She was waving her tiny fists at nothing, her face compressed in that expression infants make when they're attempting to comprehend the world. Something occurred to Marcus's face then, just for an instant, like a door opening and light spilling through. Then it sealed again and he turned away. "Storm will clear by tomorrow," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Day after at the latest. We'll sort things then." He left the kitchen without a backward glance. Cade watched him go. Then he looked down at Wren, still pumping her fists, still making those small happy noises at the ceiling. "Don't get used to this," he whispered to her. "We're not staying." But even as he said it, he felt the heat of the stove at his back, the heaviness in his stomach, the roof steady above his head. He picked up the broom and went back to sweeping. That afternoon, someone knocked on the front door. Cade froze halfway up the stairs, Wren in his arms. Below, he heard Marcus's boots cross the floor, heard the hinges complain as the door opened. "Ruth." His tone was flat. "Weather didn't stop you, I see." "Weather's never stopped me yet, Marcus Webb, and you know it." A woman's voice, warm and sharp at once. "Brought a few things. Figured you might need." Silence. Cade could picture her face catching on something unexpected. "Marcus." The warmth drained out of her voice, replaced by something cautious. "Who's that on your stairs?" Cade came down slowly, one tread at a time. The woman in the doorway was maybe 60, broad-shouldered, grey hair pulled back tight, a face that looked like it had seen everything twice and forgiven half. She held a basket under a checkered cloth, and her eyes were bright and hard as splinters. "This is Cade," Marcus said. "And his sister. They're staying till the storm passes." Ruth Calder said nothing for a long beat. She looked at Cade, looked at the baby, looked at the way he held her, protective, practiced, like someone holding the only thing he couldn't afford to lose. Then she looked at Marcus, and something passed between them that Cade couldn't read. "Well," Ruth said at last. She stepped inside and set the basket on the table. "Brought extra, just in case. Bread, some preserves, bit of ham." She looked at Cade again, and her voice gentled. "You hungry, boy?" Cade didn't answer. Ruth turned to Marcus. Lena would have liked him. The name hit the room like a rock dropped in still water. Marcus's whole body went stiff. "Don't," he said. "Marcus. Don't." Ruth pressed her mouth into a line and nodded once. She looked at Cade with something that might have been pity or might have been recognition. "Hard to say. If you need anything," she said, "you send word. Calder's Mercantile. Anyone in town can point you." Then she was gone, leaving only the basket on the table and the name hanging in the air like smoke. Cade stood at the bottom of the stairs, rang quiet against his chest. Marcus hadn't moved. He stared at the door Ruth had pulled shut, his hands knotted at his sides. "Who's Lena?" He jerked like Cade had hit him. "Nobody," he said. "She's nobody." "Oh." He walked past Cade without another word and disappeared into the back of the house. A moment later, a door closed. Not the locked one. His own room, maybe. Or some other place a man could go to be alone with what was eating him. Cade looked at the basket Ruth had left. Then at the photograph on the wall, the young woman with the soft expression and the waiting eyes. Lena. He filed the name away with the sealed door and the way Marcus's face had cracked open when Wren laughed. Then he went to see what was inside the basket. He caught Marcus staring at his boots. Marcus looked away too quickly. 3 days now. The storm had eased to steady snow, then to flurries, then to a cold so sharp it burned to breathe. The road to town still lay under 4 feet of white, and Marcus said it would be another 2 days at least before the county center plow through. Maybe longer. Cade didn't mind. He told himself he didn't mind. The days had slipped into a pattern. He woke before first light, fed Wren, came downstairs to find coffee already brewed and food keeping warm on the stove. He ate more now than that first morning, though still less than Marcus set out. Then he worked, swept the floors, beat the rugs, scrubbed the pots, fed the hens in the small enclosure behind the house, scattering feed with hands that trembled from cold while Wren watched from the basket he carried everywhere. Marcus didn't tell him to do any of it. Didn't thank him either. But Cade caught him noticing. The way his gaze tracked the clean windows, the freshly stacked kindling, the order Cade was building out of his solitary mess. Marcus noticed, and he didn't stop him. And that was enough. That was the arrangement. Even if neither had spoken it aloud. But the boots. Marcus kept looking at the boots. It was mid-morning, the fourth day, and Cade was kneeling by the fireplace in the main room, coaxing the embers back to flame. Wren was in her basket nearby, gnawing on a wooden spoon he'd given her to chew on. Marcus sat in the large chair by the window, mending a bridle, his hands moving with the ease of long habit. "Where'd you get those boots?" Cade's hands froze on the poker. He didn't turn around. "Found them." "Found them where?" "On the trail." "Someone abandoned them." Silence. Cade could feel Marcus studying his back, testing his words like a man testing coins to check for fakes. "They're too big for you," Marcus said finally. "They keep me upright." Cade heard him shift in his chair, the groan of leather, then nothing. When he finally turned around, Marcus was looking at the bridle in his hands again, his face shut down and unreadable. But there was something in the set of his jaw. Not suspicion, exactly. Something gentler. Something that looked almost like worry. Cade went back to building the fire. That night, after supper, Marcus asked about his mother. They were sitting at the kitchen table, Marcus with his coffee, Cade with a cup of milk he'd finally stopped refusing. The question came from nowhere, dropped into the quiet like a stone into a well. "What was she like?" "Your mama." Cade wrapped both hands around his cup, felt the warmth sink into his palms. On the floor beside him, Wren was sleeping in her basket, her breathing soft and steady. "She sang," Cade said. "All the time. Songs I didn't know the words to. Old songs," she said. "From her grandmother's grandmother." He paused. "She had a voice like..." He stopped. Swallowed. "Like what?" "Like something you'd want to follow, even if it was leading you somewhere dangerous." Cade stared at his milk. "Daddy always said that's what got him." "Her voice?" "Said he heard her singing in a church in Missouri and followed her all the way to the altar." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sounds like he loved her." "He did." The word came out flat, final. Cade didn't say more. Didn't explain what happened after, the drinking, the debts, the way love could sour into something that reeked of whiskey and tasted like dread. Marcus didn't ask. He just sat there with his coffee going cold, looking at Cade with those eyes that saw too much. "The wagon fever," Marcus said. "When she passed, you were alone." "Had your sister?" "I had her." "That ain't what I asked." "I said?" Cade lifted his chin. "I had Wren, and I had these." He pointed at his own two hands. "That's all anyone's got in the end. What they can do and who they got to do it for." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. "That door opening again." "Just a crack." "How long you been on your own?" "Since she died." 7 months, maybe 8. He'd lost count somewhere in there, the days blurring into a long streak of cold and hunger and putting one foot ahead of the other because stopping meant dying. "We walked from Kansas. Caught a ride with a freight wagon for a while. Then..." He stopped. "Then what?" "Then we walked some more." "It wasn't a lie." "Not exactly. But it wasn't the truth either. Not the whole truth. Not the part about his daddy returning with a man and a bottle and a handshake that sold his children like cargo. Not the part about what Cade had done to break free. Marcus watched him for a long moment. Cade could feel him at the edge of the question, deciding whether to press. He didn't. Kansas to Wyoming, Marcus said instead. That's a long walk. Didn't have much choice. No, Marcus said quietly. I don't suppose you did. Silence settled over them again, but it was different now. Softer. Like a blanket instead of a wall. Wren stirred in her basket, made a small noise, then settled again. Marcus's eyes went to her. That flicker again, that crack of light. Then away. She's a good baby, Marcus said. Hardly cries. She learned not to. Cade's voice was matter-of-fact. Crying draws attention. Attention's not always good. Marcus flinched just slightly. Just for a second, but Cade saw it. How old is she? 10 months. 11 next week. He looked down at his sister's sleeping face. She won't remember any of this. The trail. The cold. Mama. His throat constricted. That's good, I think. Better not to remember. Maybe, Marcus said, his voice rough. Or maybe remembering is the only way to hold on to what mattered. Cade looked up at him. For a moment, neither spoke. You're thinking about her, Cade said. The woman in the photograph. Lena. Marcus's whole body went rigid. Mrs. Calder said her name. Cade continued, his voice careful. I knew you looked like I hit you with a spade. That's not my business. I know. Cade held his gaze. But you asked about my mama. Seems only fair. Marcus sat very still for a long time. The fire popped in the stove. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the windows in their frames. But inside the kitchen, it was warm. Warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. She was my wife, Marcus said finally. His voice was quiet, stripped of everything but the words. Lena. 12 years ago. Cade waited. She died having our baby. A boy. Little thing, no bigger than your sister there. He paused. His hands were flat on the table, and Cade could see a fine tremor running through them. Baby lived 3 days. Then he went too. I'm sorry. Don't be. The words came out sharp, automatic. Then Marcus shook his head. No, that's not, I don't mean it like that. I just mean. He trailed off. Started again. People say sorry and it doesn't change anything. Doesn't bring them back. Doesn't make the house less empty. No, Cade said. It doesn't. They looked at each other across the table. A man who'd lost everything 12 years ago and a boy who'd never had anything to lose except a sister and a pair of dead man's boots. 2 different kinds of alone. 2 different kinds of surviving. The door, Cade said quietly. The one you said was storage. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's where they were. The nursery. Marcus didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. You haven't been in there since. No. Why? Because? He stopped. His voice cracked on the word and he looked away, toward the dark window and the snow falling beyond it. Because if I open that door, they're really gone. Long as it stays closed, there's still, I don't know, a piece of it that's still alive. A piece of her. Cade thought about that. Thought about his mother's voice, the songs she used to sing. The way he sometimes woke in the middle of the night, still hearing them. That's not how it works, he said softly. Keeping a door closed doesn't keep nobody alive. It just keeps you locked out of your own house. Marcus turned back to him. His eyes were damp, though no tears fell. You're 11 years old, he said. What the hell do you know about it? 12, Cade corrected. And I know because I tried it after Mama died. I kept her shawl in my pack and I wouldn't open the pack because if I didn't look at it, maybe she wasn't really gone. He paused. Then the shawl got stolen and she was still gone. And I didn't even have the shawl anymore. Marcus stared at him. So that's what I know, Cade said. He pushed back from the table and stood, lifting Wren's basket. Holding on to closed doors doesn't bring back the dead. It just makes sure you can't use the room. He headed for the stairs. Cade. He stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. For telling me about your mama. Cade stood there for a moment, his back to Marcus, the weight of Wren warm in his arms. Every winter's hard, he said. But they end. Then he went upstairs and left Marcus alone with his cold coffee and his sealed door and the snow falling silent outside the window. Later that night, when the house was dark and still, Marcus walked to Cade's door. He stood outside it for a long moment, listening to the soft sounds of sleep within. Then he knelt down quietly, carefully, and held a piece of string against the floorboard where he'd seen the boy's boot print earlier, marking the length with his thumbnail. He didn't knock, didn't say anything. Just measured, then folded the string into his pocket and walked back downstairs. In the morning, he would ride to town. Ruth would have boots, small ones, the right size. He'd tell her they were for a neighbor's kid. Ruth wouldn't believe him, but she wouldn't ask either. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. The mayor came with a smile and a question. Is that child legal, Marcus? It was the 6th day. The road had finally cleared enough for travel, and Marcus had gone to town at first light for supplies, he'd said. For things they needed. He didn't mention the string in his pocket or the errand at Ruth's store. Cade had watched him go from the upstairs window, Wren on his hip, and felt something twist in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Not fear, exactly. Something worse. Hope. He'd spent the morning trying to kill it. Swept the floors twice, scrubbed the pots until they gleamed, fed the hens, collected eggs, stacked wood by the back door. Work was safe. Work was a transaction. Work didn't ask you to trust anything except your own 2 hands. But the hope kept creeping back. The way Marcus had looked at him last night after he'd told him about closed doors. The way his voice had cracked on his wife's name. The way Wren had giggled at breakfast and Marcus hadn't looked away this time, had watched with something soft and broken in his face, something that looked almost like hunger. Don't, Cade told himself. Don't you dare. He was upstairs changing Wren's wrappings when he heard the wagon. Too soon. Marcus had only been gone 2 hours, and town was an hour each way. Cade crossed to the window and looked out. 2 wagons. One was Marcus's. The other belonged to someone else, a black carriage with brass fittings, the kind that cost more than most folks earned in a year. 2 men sat in front. One holding the reins, the other sitting straight-backed in a dark coat and a hat that gleamed like oil. Cade's blood went cold. He knew that kind of man. Knew the way they held themselves, the way they smiled, the way they looked at people like him. Not as people at all, but as problems to be solved. Obstacles to be removed. He grabbed Wren and backed away from the window. Downstairs, voices. Marcus's, low and tight. Another man's, smooth as butter on a hot blade. Just a few questions, that's all. Nothing to get worked up about. I'm not worked up, Dalton. I'm busy. There's a difference. Of course, of course. But you understand the town has concerns. A man of your standing, taking in strays. People talk. Let them talk. The smooth voice hardened. Just a little. There's a child in your house. A child no one knows. No papers, no family, no history anyone can verify. Surely you can see how that looks. Cade crept to the top of the stairs, Wren clutched tight against his chest. He could see them now. Marcus standing in the doorway, blocking entry. And beyond him, 2 men. one thick and tired-looking with a star on his chest. The other tall and lean with silver hair and eyes like creek ice. The silver-haired man was doing the talking. Mayor Dalton. Kate had heard the name in town those first desperate days. Richest man in the territory. Owns the bank. Owns half the town council. Don't cross him unless you want your life made hard. He's a child, Marcus said. Him and his sister. They needed shelter. I gave it. That's all. And very Christian of you, I'm sure. Dalton's smile didn't reach his eyes. But there are complications. The sheriff here has been making inquiries. It seems there was some trouble down south. A man found dead on the trail near Copper Creek. Throat cut. His belongings stolen. Cade stopped breathing. That's got nothing to do with. His boots were taken, Marcus. Dalton's voice was soft now. Almost gentle. Fine leather boots. Too big for most folks. Distinctive stitching on the left one. A patch. Looked like saddle work. He paused. You wouldn't happen to have noticed anything like that, would you? Silence. Cade could see Marcus's back, the rigid line of his shoulders. Could see him not turning around, not looking up the stairs where Cade stood frozen with his sister in his arms and his heart slamming against his ribs. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said. No? Dalton leaned to the side, looking past Marcus into the house. His eyes traveled up the stairs. Found Cade. Ah, he said. There he is. Cade didn't move. Couldn't move. He felt like a rabbit caught in the open, a hawk's shadow falling over him. Dalton's smile widened. Those are fine boots you're wearing, boy. Mind telling us where you got them? He found them. Marcus's voice was hard. On the trail. That's what he told me. Found them. Dalton nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on Cade. On the trail near a dead man, perhaps? A man with his throat opened up and his pockets turned out. He's 11 years old. 12. Cade heard himself say it. His voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. I'm 12. 12 then. Dalton's smile didn't waver. Old enough to hold a knife, I'd say. Old enough to know what a man's boots are worth in winter. That's enough. Marcus stepped forward, putting himself between Dalton and the stairs. You got accusations to make, you make them to me. You want to arrest someone, you arrest me. But you leave him out of it. Marcus. The sheriff spoke for the first time, his voice weary. Nobody's arresting anybody. We're just asking questions. Then ask them and get out. Dalton raised both hands in a gesture of peace. Of course, of course. We're all friends here. He looked past Marcus again, up the stairs to where Cade stood trembling. But I'd think carefully if I were you, both of you, about what stories you tell and what boots you wear. Because the truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it? And when it does? He let the sentence hang. We'll be in touch, he said to Marcus. Give my regards to the little ones. Then he turned and walked back to his carriage, the sheriff trailing behind him like a tired dog. Marcus stood in the doorway until both wagons had pulled away, until the sound of wheels on snow faded to nothing. Then he closed the door and turned around. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. But his eyes were the worst part because they weren't angry. They weren't even scared. They were asking. Cade couldn't move, couldn't speak. Ren squirmed against his chest, picking up on his fear, starting to fuss. Cade. Marcus took a step toward the stairs. I need you to tell me the truth. I found them. The words came out too fast, tumbling over each other. I found them on the trail just like I said. I wouldn't. The truth. His voice cracked on the word. Please. And there it was. That word Cade had never heard him use before. Please. Not a demand, not a command. A request. Marcus was asking him to trust. He couldn't. He'd trusted before. Trusted his daddy when he said he was going for help. Trusted the man who bought them when he said he'd take care of them. Trust was a door you opened and couldn't close again. And whatever came through it was your own fault for letting it in. I can't, Cade whispered. Cade. I can't. He turned and ran up the stairs, down the corridor, into the room that had almost started to feel like his. He grabbed his coat, the thin patched one he'd arrived in, and wrapped Ren in the blanket from the bed. The window faced east. Below it, a porch roof. Below that, snow. He'd jumped from higher. Behind him, Marcus's boots on the stairs, coming fast. Cade, wait. He didn't wait. He pushed open the window, climbed out onto the porch roof, and dropped into the white below. The cold hit him like a fist. He stumbled, caught himself, started running. Behind him, he heard Marcus shouting his name, but the wind snatched the sound away. The storm was over, but another one was starting. And this time, he was the one who ran. The blizzard swallowed him in 3 breaths. By the 4th, Marcus couldn't see the porch. He'd come out the front door running, coatless, calling Cade's name into the white. The wind threw it back at him like a slap. Snow drove sideways, stinging his face, filling his eyes, turning the world into a howling blank. Cade. Nothing. The wind and the snow and the cold that cut through his shirt like it wasn't there. He ran back inside, grabbed his coat, his hat, his gloves, grabbed the lantern from the hook by the door, though he knew it would be useless in this. The flame would blow out in seconds, and even if it didn't, the light wouldn't cut more than a foot through the swirling white. He grabbed it anyway. Marcus staggered off the porch and into the storm, one arm raised against the wind. The snow was already knee-deep and drifting, and he could feel the cold seeping through his boots, his trousers, settling into his bones like something that planned to stay. The boy was out here. An 11-year-old boy. 12. 12, he'd said, but Marcus knew a lie when he heard one. In a coat too thin for autumn, let alone a Wyoming blizzard. Carrying a baby. Running from the only warmth he'd known in months. Because Marcus had asked him for the truth. Because you pushed, a voice whispered in his head. Because you couldn't let it alone. He'd seen Cade's face when Dalton mentioned the boots. Seen the blood drain out of him. Seen him go still the way a deer goes still when it hears the rifle cock. He'd been terrified. Not of Dalton. Not of the sheriff. Of Marcus. Of what he'd think when he knew. And what did he think? What did he think about an 11-year-old boy who'd maybe killed a man and stolen his boots and walked 500 miles in them to stand in the snow outside a store and ask to be bought? He thought the boy was the bravest damn person he'd ever met. He thought he was a child who'd done what he had to do to survive. He thought if he didn't find him in the next hour, he'd be dead, and so would his sister, and the last thing he'd have known was that he couldn't trust Marcus. Cade! The wind screamed back. Marcus searched for 2 hours, maybe 3. Time lost its meaning in the white. There was only the next step, the next drift, the next lungful of frozen air that burned going down. He covered the ground between the house and the barn. The barn and the chicken enclosure. The enclosure and the creek bed. He called Cade's name until his voice cracked and gave out. And then he kept calling in a ragged whisper that the wind stole before it left his lips. Nothing. He was gone. Swallowed up like Lena, like the baby, like everyone Marcus had ever. No. No. He wouldn't let it end like this. Not again. Not with another grave under the oak, another door to lock, another 12 years of silence and cold. The oak. Marcus stopped, turned, tried to get his bearings in the swirling white. The tree was on the eastern knoll, maybe a quarter-mile from the house. Lena had loved it. Said it was the first thing she'd seen when they rode up to look at the property, and she'd known right then that this was home. He'd buried her there. And the baby beside her. in a plot he'd fenced with iron rails and planted with wildflowers that came up every spring whether he tended them or not. Why would Cade go there? He wouldn't. He didn't know what it was. To him, it was just a tree on a hill, a dark shape against the grey sky. But something in Marcus's gut told him to look. He turned east and started climbing. He found Cade at the base of the oak, curled around his sister like a shell around a seed. He wasn't moving. Marcus dropped to his knees beside him, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Snow had drifted over the boy's legs, his back, one side of his face. His eyes were closed. His lips were blue. Cade. Nothing. Marcus pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers to the boy's throat. For a terrible, endless moment, he felt nothing. Just cold skin, still and waxy. Then a pulse. Faint, thready, but there. Oh, thank God. The words came out broken, more sobbed than spoken. Thank God. Thank God. Marcus brushed the snow from Cade's face, his hair. The boy's eyes fluttered but didn't open. In his arms, Wren stirred. She was warmer than he was. Cade had wrapped her in everything he had, given her his coat, his body heat, his life if he had to. He was ready to die for her, Marcus thought. He was ready to freeze to death under a stranger's tree to keep his sister warm. Marcus gathered him up, both of them, the boy and the baby, and started back toward the house. The walk back was the longest of his life. Cade was heavier than he looked, or maybe Marcus was weaker than he thought. The snow dragged at his legs, the wind shoved at his back, and twice he stumbled and nearly went down. But he kept moving. One step, another, another. By the time he reached the porch, he couldn't feel his hands. He kicked the door open and carried them inside. Into the warmth. Into the light. Ruth was there. He'd forgotten he'd sent for her before he left, asked her to come help while he was in town. She took one look at the bundle in his arms and went pale. Lord have mercy. Is he alive? Marcus's voice was raw, scraped clean. Barely. We need to warm him. Slow. Not too fast, or. I know how to treat frostbite, Ruth. I know you do, Marcus Webb. Ruth was already moving, pulling blankets from the chest, stoking the fire, putting water on to heat. Get those wet clothes off him. I'll take the baby. Marcus laid Cade on the rug by the fire. His eyes were still closed, but his breathing was stronger now. Shallow, ragged, but steady. Marcus pulled off his coat, thin, useless thing, and his boots. The boots. He held them in his hands for a moment. Dead man's boots. Evidence, Dalton had called them. Proof of something terrible. He set them aside and kept working. Cade woke fighting. One moment he was still, pale and cold under the pile of blankets Ruth had heaped on him. The next he was thrashing, screaming, his small fist swinging at nothing and everything. Let me go. Let me go. Marcus caught his wrists, held them firm but gentle, the way you'd hold a spooked horse. Cade. Cade, stop. You're safe. I'm not yours. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face, his voice cracking on every word. I'm not nobody's. You can't keep me. You can't buy me. I'm not trying to buy you. Then what do you want? The question hit Marcus like a punch. Because it was the same question Cade had asked that first night. What do you want for this? And Marcus still didn't have an answer the boy would believe. I want you to be warm, he said. That's all. I want you and your sister to be safe. Why? Because? Marcus's voice broke. He let go of Cade's wrists, sat back on his heels. Ruth had taken Wren into the kitchen, and he could hear her singing softly to her and old him about rivers and rest. Outside, the wind had died down, and the snow was falling straight now, quiet and steady. Because nobody should have to stand in the snow and ask to be bought, Marcus said. Nobody. Not a child. Not anyone. Cade stared at him, his chest heaving with ragged breaths, his face blotchy from crying, his lips still tinged with blue. "He sold us," he whispered. Marcus went very still. "My daddy." The words came out in a rush now, tumbling over each other like water over rocks. "He came back after Mama died. He came back, but he wasn't alone. There was a man with him. A man with money and a wagon with a cage in it." His voice dropped to nothing. "He sold us for whiskey. His own children for whiskey." Ruth had stopped singing in the kitchen. The man who bought us, he said we'd work for him, said we'd earn our keep." Cade's hands were shaking. "But I saw the way he looked at me. The way he—" He stopped. Swallowed. I knew what he wanted. So that night, when he was sleeping, I took his knife and He couldn't finish. He didn't have to. Marcus sat there in the firelight, looking at this boy, this child who had done something terrible and necessary to save himself and his sister. Who had walked 500 miles in a dead man's boots because they were all he had. Who had asked to be bought because he'd learned that everything had a price, even safety, even kindness. "How old were you?" Marcus asked quietly. 9. 9 years old. The same age his son would have been if he'd lived. "Cade." Marcus reached out slowly, giving the boy time to pull away. He didn't. Marcus rested his hand on his shoulder, carefully, gently, like he was made of something that might break. "What you did, that wasn't wrong. That was surviving. That was protecting your sister. I killed a man. And he killed a monster who bought children." Marcus's voice was steady now, surer than it had been in 12 years. "That's not murder. That's justice." Cade looked up at him. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed, full of something Marcus recognized. "Hope. The kind that hurts. You're not going to send me away. No. You're not going to tell the sheriff. No. Why?" His voice cracked. "Why do you even care?" Marcus thought about Lena. About the baby who'd lived 3 days and died in his arms. About the nursery door he'd kept locked for 12 years because opening it meant admitting they were really gone. "Because I had a son once," he said. "He didn't make it. And I've been punishing myself ever since. Locking doors. Shutting people out. Telling myself I didn't deserve." He stopped. Took a breath. "But you walked up to me in the snow and asked if I'd buy you. And God help me, Cade. I think you're the first person in 12 years who's made me want to open that door again." Cade stared at him. Then he broke. Not like before. Not fighting, not screaming. He just crumbled, fell forward against Marcus's chest, and sobbed like the child he'd never been allowed to be. Great heaving sobs that shook his whole body, that soaked through Marcus's shirt, that sounded like something tearing loose after being held too long. Marcus wrapped his arms around him. He didn't tell him it was okay. It wasn't okay. None of it was okay. Not what his father had done. Not what Cade had had to do to survive. Not the years of cold and hunger and fear. But he was here. He was alive. And for the first time in 12 years, so was Marcus. In the kitchen doorway, Ruth Calder stood with Wren in her arms and tears running down her face. Outside, the snow kept falling. Quiet now. Gentle. Like something finally letting go. He opened the nursery door. For the first time in 12 years. The dust didn't move. Nothing did. It was past midnight. Cade and Wren were asleep by the fire, wrapped in every blanket Ruth had been able to find. Ruth herself had gone home an hour ago after making Marcus promise 3 times that he'd send for her if anything changed. The storm had gentled to a whisper, and the road to town would be passable by morning. Morning, when Dalton would come back. When the questions would start again. When Marcus would have to decide what kind of man he was going to be. But that was morning. This was now. Marcus stood in the doorway of the nursery, one hand on the frame, and looked at what he'd locked away. The room was smaller than he remembered. Strange how memory made things bigger. The crib. The rocking chair. The window facing east. In his mind, this room had grown into something vast and terrible, a mausoleum of everything he'd lost. But it was just a room. 10 feet by 12. Whitewashed walls gone grey with dust. A window with frost on the glass. And in the corner, the cradle. He'd made it himself. Spent 3 months on it, working nights after Lena went to bed, sanding the wood smooth as river stone, carving little birds along the headboard because she'd said once that she wanted their children to dream of flying. He'd finished it a week before the baby came. Set it right there under the window where the morning light would fall across it, soft and golden. The baby had slept in it exactly twice. Marcus crossed the room slowly, his boots loud on the bare floor. The dust rose around his ankles like smoke. He stopped in front of the cradle and looked down at it. The carved birds. The tiny mattress still dressed with the blanket Lena had quilted. The hollow where a child should have been. "Hey, little one." His voice came out rough, broken. "Daddy's here. I know it's been a while." He reached down and touched the blanket. It was cold. Everything was cold. "I'm sorry I stayed away. I'm sorry I—" He stopped. His throat had closed up, and for a long moment he couldn't speak at all. He just stood there with his hand on the blanket, feeling the weight of 12 years pressing down on him like snow. "I thought if I kept the door closed, you'd still be here somehow. Like you were just sleeping. Like if I didn't look, I didn't have to know for sure." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Stupid, isn't it? Keeping a door closed doesn't keep nobody alive. A little boy told me that. 11 years old, and he knows more about living than I learned in 47 years. The wind murmured against the window. The frost had thickened, turning the glass into a field of white feathers. He lost his mama too. And his daddy was worse than losing. He sold him, sweetheart. Sold his own children like they were cattle. And the boy survived. 9 years old, and he did what he had to do to keep his sister safe." Marcus sat down in the rocking chair. It creaked under his weight, the first sound it had made in over a decade. "He reminds me of you. Not how you looked, we never got to see how you'd look all grown. But how you might have been. Strong. Stubborn. Too smart for your own good." He paused. "He's got your mama's eyes. Not the color. The way they look at things like they're seeing all the way through to the truth." Marcus rocked slowly, the chair creaking its old familiar rhythm. Outside, the snow had stopped. The clouds were thinning, and somewhere behind them, stars were starting to show through. "I couldn't save you," he said quietly. "I couldn't save your mama. I held you both and I watched you go and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. And I've been so angry, sweetheart. So angry at God, at the world, at myself. Angry enough to close every door and lock every window and tell myself I didn't need anyone. Didn't want anyone. Was better off alone." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "But I was wrong. Being alone isn't strength. It's just a slower way of dying." The words hung in the air. He could feel them settling into the room, into the dust, into the silence that had lived here for 12 years. "There's a little boy downstairs who needs a home. Him and his sister. And I know taking them in won't bring you back. Won't fix what's broken. Won't make up for the years I wasted being angry and cold and closed off." He lifted his head, looked at the empty cradle. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is just being there. Showing up. Doing what you can with what you got." Marcus stood slowly. His knees ached when had that started, and his back was stiff from the hours in the cold. But there was something else too. Something lighter. Like a rope that had been wound too tight for too long was finally starting to loosen. "I'm going to take care of him," he said. "Him and Wren. I'm going to give them a home, and I'm going to keep them safe, and I'm not going to let anyone, not Dalton, not the sheriff, not anyone, take that away from them." He crossed back to the doorway. Stopped. Looked over his shoulder at the room one more time. "I love you," he said. "Both of you. That's never going to change. But I think maybe it's time to let the door stay open." When he left, the door stayed open. When Marcus walked back downstairs, the fire had burned low. Cade was still asleep on the rug, Wren curled against his chest, both of them breathing slow and even. The firelight caught the edges of the boy's face, softening the sharp lines, making him look younger. 11 years old. The same age his son would have been. Marcus lowered himself into the chair by the fire and watched them sleep. His mind was quiet for the first time in as long as he could remember. No voices telling him he wasn't enough. No ghosts rattling the doors he'd tried to keep closed. Just the crackle of the embers and the soft sound of breathing and the snow silence outside. He thought about tomorrow. Dalton would come. The sheriff would come. There would be questions, accusations, demands. They'd want to take Cade away, to an orphanage, to a cell, to anywhere that wasn't here. Marcus wouldn't let them. He didn't know how yet. Didn't know what it would cost. But he knew with a certainty that felt like bedrock that he would stand between that boy and anyone who tried to hurt him. Even if it meant losing everything. Even if it meant burning down the life he'd built. Some things were worth more than safety. Some people were worth more than comfort. "What if I'm not enough?" He'd asked Ruth once, years ago, after Lena died. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he'd fail. Maybe tomorrow would bring a reckoning he couldn't win. But at least he'd try. At least he'd stop walking away. Near dawn, Cade stirred. Marcus was still in the chair, half asleep, when he heard the boy's voice. Small. Rough with sleep. "You're still here." Marcus opened his eyes. Cade was looking at him over Wren's head, his face half shadowed by the dying fire. "Where else would I be?" Cade didn't answer. Just watched him with those eyes that saw too much. "I opened the nursery," Marcus said quietly. Left the door open. Something shifted in Cade's face. "Why?" "Because a smart little boy told me that holding on to closed doors doesn't bring back the dead. Just keeps you locked out of your own house." Cade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, so soft Marcus almost didn't hear it, "Every winter's hard." "Yeah." Marcus nodded slowly. "But they end." Cade almost smiled. It was small, fragile, barely there at all. But it was real. Outside, the first grey light of dawn was creeping across the snow. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. A new day. Whatever it brought. The town was waiting for him. They'd made their decision. Marcus was about to make his. Millstone was waiting. Marcus rode into Millstone just after 9 in the morning, the snow crunching under his horse's hooves, his breath fogging in the cold air. The sky was the color of old iron, heavy and low. But the storm had passed, and the world was still, that particular stillness that comes after a blizzard, when everything is buried and quiet and waiting to see what survives. He'd left Cade and Wren with Ruth. Hadn't told them where he was going, only that he'd be back before nightfall. Cade had watched him from the window as he saddled the horse, his face unreadable, Wren in his arms. He hadn't asked Marcus to stay. Hadn't asked anything at all. But when Marcus had looked back, just before he turned onto the main road, Cade had lifted one hand. Just slightly. Just enough. Marcus had lifted his in return. Now here he was. Main Street. The trading post, the saloon, the bank, the church. All of it familiar. All of it strange. He'd ridden this street 1,000 times over 30 years, and it had never felt like enemy territory before. It did now. There were people on the walkways, more than usual for a Tuesday morning. Ranchers in heavy coats, shopkeepers in aprons, women with baskets and children at their heels. They stopped when they saw him. Stopped and stared and whispered to each other behind cupped hands. Word traveled fast in a small town. Dalton had made sure of that. Marcus dismounted in front of the church, tied his horse to the rail, took a breath of cold air that burned his lungs. Then he walked toward the town hall. The meeting was already in progress when he pushed through the doors. It was standing room only. 40 people crammed into a space meant for half that. Dalton was at the front behind the long table that served as the council desk, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. Sheriff Brennan sat beside him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Pastor Coleman was there too, and Doc Hayes, and a handful of other faces Marcus recognized from church, from the trading post, from the cattle auctions. They all turned when the door opened. Dalton's smile was the first thing Marcus saw. That smooth, oiled smile that never reached his eyes. Marcus! Dalton spread his hands in a gesture of welcome. So glad you could join us. We were just discussing the situation. I figured. Marcus walked down the center aisle, boots loud on the wooden floor. People shifted aside to let him pass, their whispers dying into silence. Thought I'd save you the trouble of coming to me. How considerate. Dalton gestured to an empty chair near the front. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. Marcus didn't sit. He stopped at the front of the room, facing Dalton across the table, and planted his feet like he was bracing for a storm. I'm not here to discuss, he said. I'm here to tell you how it's going to be. A murmur ran through the crowd. Dalton's smile flickered just for a second, then returned, sharper now. Is that so? That's so. Marcus looked around the room, meeting eyes, letting them see him. I know what you've been saying. I know the stories you've been spreading. A child killer, you're calling him. A murderer. A danger to the community. Those aren't stories, Marcus. Dalton's voice hardened. Those are facts. A man is dead. His throat was cut and his belongings were stolen. And that boy is 11 years old. The words fell into the room like stones into water, ripples of reaction, gasps, whispers, shuffling feet. 11 years old, Marcus repeated. And do you know why he killed that man, Horace? Do you know what he did to deserve it? Dalton's jaw tightened. That's not. He bought him. Marcus's voice was steady, but there was iron underneath it now. Him and his baby sister. Bought them from their own father for a bottle of whiskey and God knows what else. And he wasn't planning to put them to work in a field, if you take my meaning. Silence. Dead, ringing silence. He was 9 years old when it happened. 9. He did what any of you would have done, what any of you should have done, to protect himself and his sister from a monster. Marcus looked at Dalton, held his gaze. So you want to call him a murderer? You want to drag him off to some orphanage or some jail cell? You go right ahead and try. But you're going to have to go through me first. Dalton recovered faster than Marcus expected. The smile came back, thinner now, more knife than welcome. A touching story, he said. If it's true. But we have only the boy's word for any of it. No witnesses. No proof. Just the claims of a child who, by your own admission, has already killed once. And I'm vouching for him. You. Dalton let the word hang in the air. A man who's known him what, a week? A man who's been living alone so long he's forgotten how to be part of a community. I haven't forgotten anything. Haven't you? Dalton leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. 12 years, Marcus. 12 years since Lena. 12 years of locked doors and empty chairs and not a word to anyone about what you're feeling. And now suddenly you want us to believe you found a purpose? That this stray child, is somehow your redemption. The word hit harder than it should have. Redemption. Like Dalton could see right through him, see all the broken pieces he'd been trying to put back together. But that was the thing about broken pieces. Sometimes they fit together in new ways. Maybe he is, Marcus said quietly. Maybe that's exactly what he is. And maybe that's none of your goddamn business. It's the town's business when. No. Marcus's voice cut through like a blade. It's not. He's a child. A child who needs a home, and I'm giving him one. That's between me and him and God, and it doesn't concern you or the sheriff or anyone else in this room. He turned to face the crowd. The faces looking back at him were mixed, some hostile, some uncertain, some carefully blank. But a few were different. Ruth Calder standing near the back, her chin lifted and her eyes fierce. Doc Hayes nodding slowly like he was working through a problem. Old Mrs. Fletcher from the feed store, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. I know most of you, Marcus said. Known you for 30 years. Worked beside you. Buried your dead. Helped when the winters were hard and the cattle were dying and there wasn't enough to go around. He paused. I'm not asking for anything I wouldn't give. I'm just asking you to let me do what's right. Let me give that boy and his sister a home. Let me be the father I never got to be. Silence. Then Ruth stepped forward. Her voice rang out clear and strong. I'll vouch for him too. And for Marcus. Anyone who knows him, really knows him, knows he's the most decent man in this territory. If he says the boy deserves a chance, then he deserves a chance. Ruth, Dalton started. I'm not finished. Ruth fixed him with a look that could have curdled milk. You've been pushing for Marcus's water rights for 3 years, Horace. Don't think we all don't know it. And now suddenly you're concerned about the welfare of children. She shook her head. Sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. A ripple of something, not quite laughter, but close, ran through the crowd. Doc Hayes stood up. I'll vouch for them too. Then Pastor Coleman, slowly, reluctantly. As will I. Then others, one by one, standing up, speaking out. Not everyone. Dalton still had his allies, his debtors, his dependents. But enough. More than enough. Dalton's face had gone the color of old ash. He looked around the room, counting votes, seeing the balance shift. This isn't over, he said quietly. The law. Sheriff Brennan interrupted, speaking for the first time. Ain't interested in prosecuting a 9-year-old boy for defending himself against a child buyer. He sighed heavily and pushed back from the table. I've got better things to do with my time, Horace. And so do you. He picked up his hat and walked out. The meeting dissolved after that. People milling around, talking in low voices, shooting glances at Marcus that ranged from sympathetic to curious to grudgingly respectful. Dalton sat alone at the council table, his silver hair gleaming, his face a mask of controlled fury. Marcus didn't gloat. Didn't even look at him. He just walked out into the cold morning light, mounted his horse, and rode home. Cade was waiting on the porch when Marcus came up the road. He stood there in his thin coat. Marcus would have to get him a proper one, add it to the list, with Wren on his hip and his face tight with worry. Ruth was behind him in the doorway, one hand on the boy's shoulder. Marcus dismounted, walked up the steps, stopped in front of him. Well. Cade's voice was barely a whisper. What happened? Marcus looked at him, this fierce, frightened, unbreakable child who'd walked 500 miles in a dead man's boots and asked to be bought because he didn't know any other way to ask for help. You're staying, Marcus said. Both of you. Long as you want. Cade stared at him. His lip trembled. That's not, his voice cracked. That's not charity. No. Marcus shook his head slowly. That's not charity, Cade. That's family. Cade didn't cry. Didn't throw himself at Marcus. Didn't do any of the things a child in a story might do. He just nodded once, swallowed hard, and said very quietly, "Okay." But when Marcus put his hand on his shoulder, the boy didn't pull away. And that was enough. The morning light came through the nursery window. For the first time in 12 years. The baby was sleeping in the cradle. Cade stood in the doorway, watching Ren's chest rise and fall beneath the quilted blanket. Lena's blanket. The one with the blue and white stitching and the small imperfections that meant someone's hands had made it with love. The cradle rocked gently, moved by a draft from the window, or maybe by something else, something that didn't need explaining. The room wasn't dusty anymore. Cade had cleaned it himself 2 days ago while Marcus was out with the horses. Hadn't asked permission. Hadn't explained. Just taken a rag and a bucket and scrubbed until the windows let the light in again and the floorboard shone and the little carved birds on the cradle's headboard looked like they might actually fly. Marcus hadn't said anything when he saw it. Just stood in the doorway for a long time, his jaw working, his eyes wet. Then he nodded once and walked away. That was how they talked now. In silences and nods. In small acts that said more than words ever could. Cade came downstairs slowly, one hand on the banister, his feet quiet on the steps. The house was warm. Marcus had been up before dawn, stoking the fires, putting coffee on, doing all the small things that kept a home alive. Cade could hear him in the kitchen now, the scrape of a chair, the clink of a cup. He was wearing the new boots. They fit perfectly. Soft leather, good stitching, sized exactly right, like someone had measured his feet without him knowing. He'd found them outside his door 3 days ago, wrapped in brown paper with no note. He'd known immediately who they were from. Knew, too, that Marcus would never admit it if he asked. He hadn't asked. The old boots, the dead man's boots, the ones he'd walked 500 miles in, were gone. The ones that had kept him standing when standing was all he had were on the porch. He'd put them there that morning, side by side, toes pointing out toward the road. He didn't know why. It just felt right. Like leaving a marker. Like saying goodbye to the boy who'd worn them. That boy was still part of him. Would always be part of him. But he didn't have to be all of him. Not anymore. Marcus was at the kitchen table when Cade came in, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, his eyes on the window where the sun was just starting to clear the eastern ridge. The light caught the grey in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the weathered landscape of a face that had seen too much and survived it anyway. He looked up when Cade entered. Looked at his boots. Something moved in his face, there and gone, quick as a heartbeat. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Cade crossed to the stove, poured himself a cup of milk from the pot warming there, and sat down at the table. Not at the far end anymore. Closer now. Close enough to reach across and touch Marcus's hand if he wanted to. He didn't. Not yet. But the distance was different. The oil lamp sat on the table between them, unlit. The sun was bright enough now that they didn't need it. But it was there. The same lamp that had been burning in the window the night Marcus brought him home. The same lamp Cade had watched him light a dozen times in the days since. "I'll do it," Cade said. Marcus looked at him. "Do what?" Cade reached for the matches, struck one, touched it to the wick. The flame caught and held, steady and warm, pushing back shadows that weren't there anymore. Marcus watched him do it, didn't say anything. But his eyes said everything. They sat in the quiet for a while, the lamp burning between them, the coffee cooling, the morning light filling the kitchen with a kind of gold that only comes after hard winters. Outside, the snow was starting to melt, dripping from the eaves, settling into the earth, making way for whatever came next. "I saw the boots," Marcus said finally. "On the porch." "Yeah. I don't want them anymore." Cade looked at his hands. Small hands. A child's hands. Hands that had done terrible things and gentle things and everything in between. "They got me here," he said slowly. "That's what they were for. Getting me here." He paused. "But I don't need them to stay. Marcus nodded, took a sip of his coffee, set the cup down. "Cade." The boy looked up. Marcus's face was open in a way Cade had never seen before, all the walls down, all the doors unlocked, nothing hidden. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally set it down. "I want you to know," Marcus said, "that whatever happens next, whatever comes, you've got a place here. You and Ren. Not because I need something from you. Not because you owe me anything. Just because." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Just because you belong here. If you want to." Cade felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been locked tight for years. Since before his mother died. Since before his father walked away. Since before he learned that love was a door people walked through and never came back. "You didn't buy us," he said. His voice came out quiet, barely above a whisper, but the words filled the room like light. "You didn't buy us, mister. You just gave us somewhere to stay." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. Didn't hide. "Reckon I did," he said softly. Outside, a bird called, the first one Cade had heard since the storms began. Somewhere in the distance, water was running, snow becoming stream, becoming river, becoming something new. "Weather's turning," Marcus said. Cade almost smiled. It was small, fragile, like the first green shoot pushing through frozen ground. It always does. Later, Cade went out to the porch to watch the sun climb higher. The old boots were still there, side by side, the newspaper stuffing visible through the worn leather. He looked at them for a long time, remembering the weight of them, the way they'd rubbed his heels raw, the miles and miles they'd carried him through. Then he turned back toward the open door, the warm house, the voices inside. And he stepped over the boots without picking them up. Then he looked down at his feet at the new boots, soft and warm and exactly his size. Behind him, the door opened. Marcus stepped out and stood beside him, his shoulder almost touching Cade's. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just stood there together, watching the snow melt and the light grow and the world wake up from its long, cold sleep. In the house behind them, Ren laughed. The sound drifted out through the open door, bright and clear and full of something that sounded like joy. Like hope. Like the beginning of a story instead of the end of one. Cade turned to look at Marcus. She was already looking at him. "I think she likes it here," Cade said. "Yeah." Marcus's voice was rough, but there was warmth underneath it now. A warmth that hadn't been there before. "I think maybe she ain't the only one." Cade didn't answer. Didn't need to. He just stood there in his new boots on the porch of the house that was becoming home and let the morning light fall across his face like a promise, like a prayer answered, like grace.